Welcome, Derek, Tam-Scott, to another episode of the Carmudgeon Show, where we complain about everything. Stop smiling. We're supposed to be very upset here.
Right. Carmudgeons.
What would you like to complain about today?
BMW.
Oh, cool. First of all, we should probably complain about the noise in the background. This entire building, this is not a boat, but what you guys probably can't see is that the lights are swinging. There is currently like 50, 60, 140 mile an hour winds outside, and the whole building is creaking and the doors are rattling. So sorry about the noise.
Hopefully we'll be here for the whole episode before the roof blows off.
Oh, nice. That'd be great. I'm going to set a timer for 20 minutes to shut us up, because otherwise we'll just complain for hours and hours. Yay! So what's your beef with BMW? Timer.
They're not driver-oriented cars. They're not high-quality cars either. They just have lost their way. Like, I had an E90 335 diesel, and when I would take that into the dealer and get loaners, which were always F30 328s, I would be like, this is terrible. It feels like a rental car compared to my car. And they're both 3 Series, and I would be so excited to get back into my car. Mm-hmm. And I think you're supposed to be in the loaner so that they're like, oh, here's the new thing that I should buy to replace what I had. But all it confirmed to me was that I really didn't want to be in the F30. And I think that's not just true of the F30. I think it's true, generally speaking, for the entire BMW model line.
Wow, aren't you a fucking breath of sunshine?
Yeah.
No, but you're right. I mean, the loaner model is that, is based on the premise that cars are going to get better and better and better and better. So when I bring my old car in for service, I should get in the new car, and the new car should make me want to buy it. And unfortunately, BMW's trajectory has not been up and up and up and up. It went up, and they were on top of the world for a really long time, and then completely and totally walked away from the things that were important to the U.S. audience. And I think this is very specifically a North American kind of a thing. But all of the things that we knew of BMW as the ultimate driving machine are just irrelevant to most of the people there.
So what is the European perception of the brand? I mean, here it's the ultimate driving machine was inseparable with BMW, I would say, during their heyday, which I would say would be when the E38 7 Series and E39 5 Series and E46. In terms of the compromise between driver orientedness, but also functional, it's a good one-car solution. If you can't, it doesn't make sense for you to buy a Porsche and a Mercedes or something like that, where each of those tools is really good, and you just need one car that does kind of everything, you do track days and school runs. I think BMW of that era was really good for those types of missions.
100%.
But what was the brand image in continental Europe?
There was, I mean, I can speak mostly on behalf of Germany, right? I know the German market more than anything else, and the Germans love to drive. Loved, past tense, to drive. It's over. The Germans have really fallen out of love with driving, and I think that was it's a function of, Europe opening up, which led to a lot more crowding on the roads. This is the 1990s. A lot more crowding on the roads, and the autobahns started to become more speed restricted. And then there were speed cameras. There's speed cameras through the 80s and 90s also, but they're now everywhere. And the Green Party in Germany has taken over, not taken over, but they've taken hold and really pushed to lower speed limits and lower consumption. And the net result is that you have speed cameras everywhere, you have speed limits everywhere, and there's a lot more traffic. And people just don't give a fuck about driving anymore. They just want technology, which is why, I just went on the launch of the new 3 Series earlier this year, and there was this huge presentation about the in-car technology, about, you can say, hey, BMW, turn the radio up, but the car drives like shit. Slight exaggeration, but there was not a single mention of all of the things that we would expect the ultimate driving machine's PR people to be talking about: handling, steering, engines, powertrain overall. They didn't mention it. They were like, yeah, but it's got this stupid fucking hey BMW thing that doesn't work. And I think that really points to a sea change in Germans' attitudes. I think that's what happened. So they're making cars that aren't focused on the driving experience. They're focusing on in-car tech, and the Germans are not great at doing tech. And then on the other flip side, you have the Quandt family who owns BMW. I think everyone is recognizing that it's the end of the world for the traditional automakers. We are really looking at the end. And how do you move forward when autonomous vehicles are coming? BMW should have hunkered down and been the last company to get rid of the driving experience and said, when everything goes autonomous, or maybe we'll be part of that, but we'll keep our USP, our unique selling point. or a unique selling proposition that, were the best driving cars. Instead, they double down on the autonomous tech functions. And I think, and I know a lot of people within BMW North America feel the same way, that they're accelerating their own demise because they're giving up all the things that were great, interior quality and driving experience, in favor of technology that's...
What about other German marques? Like, well, Porsche, I think, just not philosophically, well, I don't know, I haven't driven that many new Porsches.
Porsche's stuff, I would say the 911 GT cars are philosophically as closely aligned to their heritage as any car in the world, and they are 100% exactly what they need to be. The 992 I just drove, the new 911, it's a little techie focused and a little like autonomously focused and not really so much concerned with the driving experience. But as long as I know a GT3 is coming, I'm fine with it. No mistake, make no mistake, 992 is an incredible 911 in terms of being a great luxury car and then mind-bending performance and mind-bending track performance and everything else. But all I'll say is
it gratifying?
Yeah, on a track it's gratifying. It's unfortunately not on the road anymore, but that's, I think no German cars are, very few are. But I think that the explanation of this is something we've talked about before, that you and I agree on, is everyone has a bad day. And the best example there that we could both come up with is Mercedes. And as much as I'd love to say it's doomsday for BMW, and no matter what they do, if they keep shitting out these cars, and it's going to get worse with that front-wheel drive 2 Series and whatever, if it's right, I mean, I'd love to say doomsday, it's over and they're not going to survive. If Mercedes didn't kill themselves of what they did in the late 1990s, no brand will. Like, BMW's got nothing to worry about. I mean, they were...
Was there like a big philosophical shift? So like, I guess we should talk about what happened in the late 90s to Mercedes-Benz.
Let me back up for a second and say that starting in the 1980s, Mercedes somehow got into a time machine and fast forwarded 15 or 20 years. And by the time you got to the late 80s, their cars, or the mid 80s, their cars were decades ahead of everything else on the road. And they were priced it. I mean, if you look at like a 4-cylinder 190, from the mid 80s, we're talking $60,000, $70,000 in today's money. And an S-Class, when the 140 came out in 1991, that was a $90,000 car base. It's not even $90,000 now base where it is effective, but cost adjusted, they were Bentley territory, and they were genuinely engineered like no other to use their stupid ad campaign, right? And then they bought Chrysler. And they ran out of money. There's that wind, sorry. They bought Chrysler. So we can chart it out. I mean, if you look at like the build of Mercedes, you had the 201, which is the 190E in 1984. And then in 1986, you had the
W124 300E.
Which I basically think is probably the best overall Mercedes-Benz sedan of all time. Those cars shared...
Not the 123, there's all these rabid 123 people.
123 is a wonderful car, and I love their French styling on it. Was Paul Brock, it's kind of cool and funky, but that wasn't a game changer for engineering.
Not sophisticated technically, but very durable.
The 201, which is the 190E, was a strange thing that the board finally agreed, the management board finally agreed to let Mercedes make a small car because they had to for fuel economy standards, for CAFE, corporate average fuel economy. So they had to make efficient cars. They had to make a little car. And for the first time ever, a business case existed for Mercedes-Benz to make a small car. But they had been trying to do this for years and were so worried that it was going to screw up their brand that the board said, fine, you can do this, but this car has to be comparable to an S-Class in every measure. Ride quality, NVH, silence, crash worthiness, it's all safety and all that other shit. So you have this car that debuted, and it, kind of a little bit of a plastic interior and some other cost-cutting measures. But from an engineering standpoint, that in 1982, that car went into production, and that rear suspension and a lot of the engineering for that car is still in production today in a Hellcat, in a 700 or Demon 850 horsepower car. That is the same thing extrapolated over 40 years. We're almost at 40 years for that car. So think about what a quantum leap that was over the 123 to get to the 201. And so you have 201, then 124, and then the 126 S-Class wasn't quite there yet. That was earlier, strange number was. But then the 140, the Princess Diana car.
Yeah.
I mean, hate to say that. I mean, but look.
Wasn't it a 129 also? Oh, you're talking about her demise. 129 was a car she personally owned.
Yeah, 129 Princess Diana drove, but she died in a 140 only because she didn't have a seatbelt on. But there's a car that had a 120 mile an hour impact into a fixed object, and the driver didn't die. He was the only one without a seatbelt on. Passenger, front passenger.
Only one who had a seatbelt
Had
on.
been.
Do you need coffee?
Yes, really. Don't we work for Italians? Don't they have cafe? Anyway, but I think you can start to chart the demise where they sort of phased in shittiness starting in like 98 with the 202 facelift.
Or the W210, the 4-headlight E-Class. Well, it got worse when they facelifted it, which also happened with the C-Class. I mean, in 98, you look at the interior quality and you're like, oh, this is considerably worse than the pre-facelift.
They were pulling money out. They were pulling out money out left and right to save money because they were losing so much in Chrysler. And so by the time you get to the mid-2000s,
like the Blobby S-Class, the W220.
I mean, look, it's bad enough that I don't like the way it looks, but have you been in one recently?
No.
That's
because there aren't any left on the road.
Right, they rusted in the ground. They are genuine shit boxes. Like, I can't believe the switches all rattle and they feel like shit. All the plastics are terrible. And you think, how the fuck did Mercedes buyers not stop buying this? And they didn't. They kept buying these things. So that just tells me that, like, BMW is probably going to survive this all just fine. Because I don't think they're any worse than Mercedes was in 2003, for example.
Yeah. And other people have bad days too. I think like Porsche right around the same time as Mercedes, like when the 986 and 996 came out, certainly. I mean, Porsche almost went out of business in the early 90s because their cars were too expensive. They were spending a lot of time on rework, and so they hired Japanese consultants who implemented Kaizen and Toyota Production System in Porsches, and I think they maybe overdid it. And so some of the Porsches like that came out after they Kaizened the design process, for example, combining the headlights and fog lights into one, and then you get the fried egg lights that people don't like on Boxsters and 996s. Like they probably went a little overboard there, but
the interiors were just...
Yes.
I mean, I've owned a 986 and a 996, so I can say this. Wretched. Like, Daewoo's had better interiors.
The 996, if you spent enough money ticking options, could be made serviceable if you got like the aluminum e-brake handle and sill plates and leather dash and all that stuff. Then it was like serviceable, but yeah, generally kind of crappy. But I mean,
but it saved the company.
Otherwise, the company would have gone out of business because I think like Porsche sold in North America 30,000 cars in 1986, and then in 1993 they sold 3,800. cars, which is, what is that? That's only 7 years. And so I think they were just in a lot of trouble, and the money that they saved on those cars allowed, so at least it was done intentionally in Porsche's case. Mercedes was kind of reactionary to what had happened. Well, they needed to
save money too, right?
Yeah, because of a self-inflicted wound shot in the foot.
That was a fucking shot to the dick. I mean, they bought Chrysler, and man, did they get had. Like, you know, I worked for Chrysler at the time, and it was when I was in college, and we did put cars on displays in malls, and they had the most appealing product line. That neon was so cute, and it was fast. Like, they did it was styled well, and it was fast, and that was like all you needed for a cheap shitbox. But it was a genuine wretched shitbox. The Breeze, the cloud cars, the Breeze, Cirrus, and Stratus. Go look up the crash test videos of those cars, like where like a 3 Series would go poof into the IIHS, like 40% off test or 40 mile an hour straight on test. They would just boom and like, oh, okay, that would really hurt. The airbags would go off, and the fucking Chryslers would just explode into a puddle of shit. I mean, they were just bad cars, but they were great looking. And the LH cars, the Concorde and the Intrepid, great. They had such an awesome, unkillable product lineup based on appeal. And the Germans must have gotten there and like, what the fuck is this shit? I mean, they were just like, you know, to go from like to working for like Mercedes. Can you imagine like the guy who did the rear suspension that took them like, they spent 5 billion Deutschmarks on the rear suspension alone. Mercedes spent more money developing the 190's rear suspension than BMW did developing the E30, like the whole car. So then they go over and they're like, look at the neon, like what the fuck is that? So no wonder they cut costs, because they were gonna, like, all of a sudden they realized this is the merger of equals, and Chrysler had no products. Chrysler had nothing. Those Concorde, by the way, those LH cars, and so the Concorde Intrepid 300M
LHS
were based on a Renault. That's why they had a longitudinal engine. There was a longitudinal
longitudinal engines?
Uh-huh.
Like a Saab 900.
Audi layout. Because they had took it from Renault. All the Renault stuff became that.
Wait, those cars have longitudinal engines?
Uh-huh. That 3.5 liter V6 and a 300M, for example, a longitudinale. So like, this is how fucked up Chrysler was, that they had like vestiges from Mitsubishi, right? So they have the clips and all that, like awesome, cool stuff. But then they had like old Renault crap lying around. They had old VW stuff lying around in the K cars with like, that, what is that? The Dodge Omni was basically Volkswagen motor that was made under license. They were scraps of other people's like shit boxes. And Mercedes comes in, they ruined, almost killed both companies. But it didn't. I mean, it didn't.
Yeah, now Mercedes.
I'd say they're doing just great. I have very few problems with the cars that Mercedes is making.
Yeah.
I have very few problems with the cars that Porsche is making. I mean, I don't love that it's an SUV brand now, but it is.
Yeah, but if it allows them to make GT cars.
And man, are those GT cars good. Man. So like, who am I to bitch about a Cayenne when that fucking GT3 is magic? I can't wait to drive GT4. So, BMW survived their bad days. Porsche, I mean, 996 was not a great day in a lot of respects for that car. IMS bearing.
Rear main seals,
right.
Air oil separators.
Had a lot of problems.
I had a lot of problems with mine.
I had no problems with mine.
That's because you bought it new.
No, I bought it with 40,000 miles on it.
Oh.
And sold it with like 50.
You bought it when it that's new to me.
Yeah. No, I sold that. Thank God I sold that thing before it. Like, I'm sure my Boxster. So I bought a Boxster with like no miles on it, like 30,000, and sold it with like 35. And the guy who bought it from me, man, he got hit with everything. Like right away, it was like $1,000 alternator, and then like $2,000 with the PCV system stuff. And I'm like, this shouldn't be happening on like a 40,000 mile car that was only a couple years old. And then IMS, but he caught it right. Like as it was rattling, the mechanic friend of mine, the best mechanic I've ever seen work, literally he pulls into the shop and he's like, yeah, it's making a funny noise. And Nate was like, the fuck? And he literally jumped across the passenger side of the car and grabbed the key, turned it off right as the IMS shaft failed, and threw the timing chain off. And he's like, I think we might have gotten to stop in time. I don't know. And thank God no bent valves. But yeah, I mean, this is like the problem with 986, 996, that whole generation. But I think everyone has a bad day. I mean, you made a funny joke about that. Audi's had a bad day for the last 40 years.
No, I mean, Audi makes good cars now. It was really their first, when did the Audi first appear? Like, as its modern company, I think 1970 with the 100.
Right.
And, like, when was Audi's first good car? I mean, so, disclosure, I have an Audi from the dark ages, and I love the car, but it is a pain in the ass. This coming from someone who's owned 2 Alfa Romeos and a 12-cylinder Jaguar. And this Audi is a pain in the ass.
Low fucking bar. So it's a 200 Avant 20 valve turbo 5-speed.
Yes.
Like
1 year only.
In Jizz Pearl White, which is the color.
Yeah. It is like an epically cool car, but it is a test of my patience for sure. But I mean, so when did Audi's first good car appear? Was it like the first A4?
Like all those 4000s and the 5000s and 100s, 200s were just so charming. But you're right, I don't think they were great cars.
No, as cars, like by modern or like by normal people's standards, where it's like this car functions and it gets me to places when I want to go to them,
A4.
and it doesn't cost a lot of money.
B5 A4.
B5
so
A4.
98.
Yeah.
I think that was a really nice car. They have never.
Was that like a re-Passatted Passat or something?
No, that became the Passat. So Volkswagen took that for the B5
then became
Passat.
afterwards.
But it's Audi layout. It's longitudinal, so the Passat was also longitudinal for that one generation. Actually, the first generation Passat was also an Audi, which was called Dasher. No, Quantum first, Dasher.
Quantum, yeah. Wasn't one like a wagon, or did they reach?
They had wagons,
I don't
right?
Follow.
But in the rest of the world, they were B1 Passat, B2, B3. So B3 became Passat in the U.S., and that was transverse. That was basically a large Mark II Golf. But yeah, B5 A4, that first A4, I think that was a really nice car. No performance cred. I mean, you didn't S4 with the turbos and whatever, but they hadn't yet figured out how to make the car really handle well. But a nice car, and they make really nice cars. So they had
what about C4s? They're like for the 100, like from the early 90s.
I'm kind of scared of all that stuff. It's something about Audi parts. We got 2 minutes to wrap this up. I'm kind of scared of most old Audis and for parts prices wise, and like once
Or
you get
availability.
right, but you get like that to compensate for that engine completely in front of the wheels. They have that 5-link front suspension, and that means 10 bushings that go bad, and the kit to replace, and they go bad every like 50, 60,000 miles depending on roads. That's thousands of dollars in parts just to do a suspension rebuild, where like something with a McPherson strut has like one control arm bushing that goes bad, and that's it.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of, Audi does over complexity almost as well as Mercedes does. But yeah, to get back to BMW, I'm sad for them. I'm sad for this company. I'm rooting for them. There's a lot of people internally that I love and I adore and I think mean well and want well, but for whatever reason, the Germans have just stopped loving driving. And I just saw that Mini canceled all their manuals. Like you can't even get a John Cooper Works with a stick anymore. Like they did it quietly. No one seems to have noticed, but I think it's really just over for the enthusiast part of BMW. And
then there's still these buyers out here who are like hardcore BMW fanboys, and I'm like, are you not paying attention when you operate your vehicle about how like it's not fun to drive and how the interior kind of sucks?
But remember that we are exactly at BMW where we were in the early 2000s with Mercedes. We're like, do you realize your S-Class is a rusting piece of shit? And they're like, no, but it's a Mercedes-Benz. It's the same thing with these asshole BMW fanboys. And I'm sorry to be that way, but like we have friends who are like, I bought an M550i and it's great. It's wretched. It's like, it's not even like, you're not even allowed to be like in the realm of good when you're described. The car is terrible. And they can't get, brands have a very long
lag where
lag,
people have
right.
like the positive affinity remains even
Right.
after the product is no longer good.
And it takes a lot, they have a lot of momentum.
Betrayal
it takes a lot,
before
right?
the person
It's
will
happening.
actually.
All my BMW friends are now starting to buy Teslas, and I'm like, oh, thank God. Thank God, because now, like, you can bitch all you want about Teslas, but when you get out of a BMW, you get into Tesla, and you're like, okay, this is a better car. Not a good sign for the BMW stuff. Okay.
All right, BMW, get your
Just
shit
a bad
together.
day. Let's come on. Maybe tomorrow will be a new day.
Fingers crossed.
Okay.